right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering all sorts of questions live on YouTube. Lots of gems, lots of wooden dummy nonsense, and lots of, did Brandon Lee say what? Let's get to it.
And every day, I practice martial arts.
Yo, here we are.
Here we
What's
go,
up, guys. So, for those
Hey, how you doing?
For those of us joining us today in the live stream, you may notice a slightly different format. I, for whatever reason, have a brick background behind me because everything that could go wrong did go wrong today. First of all, I left my laptop at the school, the laptop that I would normally use for the live stream. Second, I got locked out of my house when I went to go pick up my girls from the school, so I'm awaiting a set of keys to get into my house, so I'm live streaming from the phone. So how are you gents doing?
Are you in Starbucks, Sifu?
No, I'm right in front of my door waiting for a key to come. So that's what's going on right now.
Okay, that's awesome.
How you doing, Mikey?
What is it? What do they call that? The
Doing good, Seagung. Just
MacGyver's edge. What is that called? When everything can go wrong.
It's called
everything
Murphy's
that's
Law.
going to go wrong.
That's called Sod's Law.
It's called Murphy's Law.
Murphy's Law in
Sod's
America,
Law.
Sod's Law in England.
Sod's Law.
So yeah. Sod's Law.
Law of Zod. Kneel before me when something goes wrong.
Oh yeah.
Amazing. So here we are. We're doing a Patreon only live stream, and it is it's just for our Patreons who can join us. Which, of course, because we have Patreons from all over the world, it's not always possible for them to join us at one time because obviously they're all over the place. We have people who support us on Patreon who are probably still sleeping in bed right now. So what I also did was I put a survey, or I made a post on Patreon and asked what kind of questions would you guys like me to answer. So even if we don't have a bunch of our Patreons live today here in the stream with us, we still have their questions to answer. So we do have one question right off the bat, which is the whole theme of today's episode. Dre, why don't you get into that?
Yeah, sure. Oscar Menendez.
Hey, Oscar Menendez, that's what's up.
Yeah, top Patreon of the day. I wish I had something like your podcast when I was a teen. Okay? I wish we all had something like that as a teen. All I had were magazines. My mind was blown learning that Bruce did not finish his training in Wing Chun and that later Yip Man refused to teach him the wooden dummy form. Still, I have seen pictures of Bruce working out on a dummy. He was probably the first to bring a jong to the States. Okay? My two-part question is, what benefits would someone gain from the dummy not knowing the proper way to train on it? He may have learned some of the form from WSL. You may know more. I guess WSL means like, what, wizard from St. Louis? Something like that?
It means Wong Samang, you ignoramus.
Okay. Just making sure. Lastly, with modern training, is the dummy still relevant in the 21st century?
These are all very great questions. The door's just been open, so I'll finally be able to get back into my place. Right as I answer the first question on the stream. This is perfect timing.
Yes.
Okay, so bear with me a little bit. Well, that's actually a very good question. Now, the first thing that Oscar said is actually one of the more interesting things for me, which is that he said, we grew up on magazines, and he wished he had something like our podcast when he was growing up. The thing is, I grew up on magazines. I also grew up on books. And I think that that's the exact reason we talk about this on podcasts regularly. I don't think the new generation, which is learning everything by osmosis through YouTube, will necessarily be able to talk about these things at length the way we do, because we can talk about these things because we grew up with the magazines. We read all that stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that that's actually part of it. Hold on. I know this is not the most flattering view. Hold on a second. Okay, so
That's great. This is
There we
the
go.
best episode ever.
this is the best
So
episode
far, my
ever, right?
favorite.
Okay,
My
yeah, now I'm
favorite so
finally
far.
inside my house. Perfect.
All right.
Okay, so the question is a little. So the first part, if I understood it correctly, was about whether Bruce Lee had properly learned the dummy or not, because he has, supposedly was the first or one of the first people to bring the dummy to the States, and then obviously there are photos of him on the dummy. Obviously, he taught his students stuff on the dummy. So the question is always, well, if he didn't really learn the dummy officially,
What did he teach? Right.
then what the hell was he teaching on the wooden dummy? All right. And so I think then we get into these kind of questions about the nature of the wooden dummy and who learned what and what is its utility and all that kind of stuff, right? So on the whole, the kind of Jeet Kune Do perspective about things is that the wooden dummy is just a tool. It's just a training device. Nothing any more special than a heavy bag. I feel like Mr. Rogers coming into my house, taking off my sweatshirt. Yeah, take off my shoes, right? And
changing them up.
Very funny.
Honestly, I'm just glad that you're now into Wi-Fi range, because now you're going to stop sounding like an 80s robot.
That's right.
Sweet.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, the sound guy would know.
So,
definitely.
So anyway, the question is, well, if he had properly learned the dummy or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty clear. I mean, it's difficult to say what Bruce Lee, in fact, learned and didn't learn, because none of us were there. We're going on what he said, what other people said, and these are not always the most reliable methods of getting that knowledge. I think Bruce Lee is really the only one who could say for sure what he had learned and what he didn't learn. I don't think he learned the wooden dummy formally, certainly not from Grandmaster Yip Man. That doesn't preclude the possibility that he had learned some of the dummy stuff from his Sihangs, from one of his seniors here and there, and so he could have, as the Chinese like to say, stole the wooden dummy techniques from an unsuspecting senior at some point, right? Which is how a lot of stuff was taught in those days. You would you would go and you would learn from your teacher, and then your Sihangs in the class would often show you something on the side, or hey, see who showed me this, or hey, let me show you this thing over here, right? So much of what we learn in the Kung Fu school in fact comes somewhat informally from our training partners, and this has always kind of been the tradition, and I think it's probably pretty similar in most traditional martial arts schools, that you have your teacher, and then when you have some trusted classmates or some trusted seniors, that they come and they supplement what you're learning on the side, or they show you stuff, or occasionally show you stuff that the Sifu or the sensei hasn't shown you yet. So,
well, the thing is, when I was coming up, I had a couple of Sihangs that would show me stuff, but I was actually the dummy that they were showing the stuff on. So that was fun for me.
Well, that's often how we learn, being the punching dummy for a little bit, and that we've all taken our licks as far as that goes, right?
Oh yeah.
So it was no different for me when I was coming up. So that's the first part, is that I don't believe that Bruce Lee formally learned the dummy for a couple of reasons. One, he wasn't technically qualified from a Wing Chun perspective in terms of how much Wing Chun he had learned to be at the level to learn the wooden dummy. He was not there yet, so to speak. But that doesn't stop, any Sihangs or other classmates from kind of showing him some stuff on the side. The other possibility is that he also just could have seen seniors practicing on the dummy, whether during class or outside of class or informally, and just kind of like most people kind of put a little side eye on that and copy a few movements. And if you understand anything about the basic wooden dummy techniques, a lot of the basic wooden dummy stuff are normal techniques that he may have already learned in the fist fighting bit, but just didn't learn it on the dummy. And then he just watches some senior do it on the dummy and he puts two and two together, right? That doesn't mean he has knowledge of the form. That doesn't mean he has knowledge of, or had knowledge of, the intricacies of how the wooden dummy is applied in terms of how do you use these movements from the form in Chiu or Gao or Lutso. But he probably borrowed some stuff there, right? And so, Mikey, whatever that is that you're grabbing is so loud in my headphones.
Sorry, I can't hear it. Yeah,
I thought
sorry.
you had a pack of rabbits back there or something.
I'm doing my impression of Dre.
Got it. You probably need to put it on mute if you want to grab another crisp out of the bag, right?
I'll stop. One more.
Yeah, mute the cop car behind you too. Or the ambulance.
Who's got the cop car going on? That's definitely not me. There we go. All right, good.
That's definitely Mikey.
The solution was just to mute Mikey. That was the whole solution right there. So there we go. Now he can't say anything. We can make fun of his accent. We can make fun of all sorts of things. So when it comes to Bruce Lee and the wooden dummy, he could have learned it on the sly from a Siheng. He could have stolen some techniques. It could be a mixture of both of those. But for sure, I don't think he learned the proper wooden dummy techniques. Now that also opens a question. Well, then where did the Jun Fan wooden dummy sets come from? Because in a lot of Jeet Kune Do schools, they teach the Jun Fan dummy sets, which are the Bruce Lee sets on the wooden dummy. I've seen those sets, and parts of it look like they've just been lifted off of the form. And I cannot determine whether that was done during the time of Bruce Lee or after. I mean, remember that Bruce Lee died in 1973. And in the ensuing years, more and more Wing Chun Sifu published books about the wooden dummy techniques. Eventually, there were videos and tutorials that came out from various teachers of Wing Chun throughout the 70s and the 80s. So when I see, because I've had some various teachers show me the wooden dummy sets, the Jun Fan wooden dummy sets, and it looks like part of it looks like it's lifted from the form, part of it looks like it's could be lifted from another source. So it's very difficult to say when did those Jun Fan sets come in. I don't think Bruce Lee learned them as such, but I'm willing to be corrected on that point.
I have never heard of the Jun Fan wooden dummy sets. I've never seen them. When I practice Jeet Kune Do or Jeet Kune Do concepts, I didn't know they existed. I'm very curious what these look like now.
It looks like the first few sets of the form, and then from what I recall, the later sets, which for sure Bruce Lee did not have access to, set 7, set 8, those kind of things. It looks a little more Jeet Kune Do-y, for lack of a better term. But again, I would have to talk to someone who actually knows about it. Sorry, I'm just adjusting my camera right here. I would have to talk to someone who knows more about that, because I don't know. When I looked at them, I had the sneaking suspicion where whatever their source was is not Bruce Lee. I think that this might have been added into Jeet Kune Do later, but I could be totally wrong. I don't have any skin in the game as far as that goes. It's just my observation as a total outsider, and it could also totally be wrong, and I'm fine with that. So then the second part of the question was whether the wooden dummy itself still has relevance in terms of being a training tool. And I would say my answer to that is as follows. The wooden dummy is a training tool, and it can be used simply as a training tool to practice kicks and punches and positions and jolting power and moving around your opponent's force and doing some of these movements, against a training apparatus. Then there is also the question of the actual form, because and I talk about this in my wooden dummy book, cleverly titled "The Wooden Dummy," available at citywt.com. One of the points I make in the book is that there are kind of like two camps within both Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do, and it's the one camp is kind of like, the wooden dummy is just a training tool. It's in the same category as a heavy bag, or the same category as a Makiwara board, or the same category as insert any normal type of training piece of equipment. So that's why you have Jeet Kune Do people going up to the dummy and just kind of almost using it like a makeshift kind of heavy bag with some arms, right? And when I see people like Anderson Silva or Tony Ferguson work their stuff on there. It's like a mixture of some stuff they saw in movies and just using the thing as in an intuitive kind of way based on their own martial arts ideas, right? So there is the aspect of it is also just a training tool, can be used as such to develop attributes, power, timing, distance, whatever you want to work on. But then there is also the other aspect of that in proper classical Wing Chun, there's a form attached to that training apparatus. And if you learn this form and you have a qualified teacher, that teacher can also show you how to use those movements on the form with a partner. And the wooden dummy has a special place in the Wing Chun's curriculum, or I should say in Wing Chun's curriculum, where it acts as both a refinement device to streamline how you move and what you do to essentially learn to do more with less. There's a power transfer modality in terms of how to transfer that short force into your opponent without pulling back your arms, which is not exclusive to the dummy, but the dummy further instructs this point. And then there's also the straight up applications of these movements in Gaosao and sparring against either other Wing Chun people or against highly specialized attacks. That's a whole body of knowledge that you need to learn the form. Then you need to learn how it's applied in Chi Sao, and then how it's applied in free fighting, Latzao, whatever you want to call it. And that's the part that we're talking, when we say the wooden dummy techniques, we're not just talking about doing the form and going, okay, you know the form, now you're a badass.
You know it.
You got to know how to use that, you know, how to use the neck pull and counter the neck pull, and what is Tan Sao Tai Chuan for, and Ghost Hand, and how do we use Popeye and all of its different iterations against a resisting opponent, right? There's that whole body of knowledge. And when non-Wing Chun people talk about the wooden dummy, they often assume that the wooden dummy is just the first category. It's just a training device. Right. And so they're like, well, why do you need to learn a form? You could just go on that thing and freestyle. And I'm like, yeah, I'm all for it. You can use it as a tool. It is a tool. I use the wooden dummy. I just train on the wooden dummy. I don't necessarily even do the form that much anymore. I only do the form when I need to teach it. Okay. But we're also talking about specifically in Wing Chun, this body of knowledge, which is codified in a form that then is later taught in free fighting and in application. And if you don't learn that, then you don't know how to use the wooden dummy techniques. And that is a separate thing. So to learn Wing Chun properly and completely, you need to do it. But the wooden dummy doesn't replace a sparring partner. Wooden dummy doesn't replace Gaosao. Wooden dummy doesn't replace the practical training tools that we have in Wing Chun. It's just one of the tools we have to teach the art. So if someone doesn't have access to the wooden dummy form, applications, Gaosao, how to use this stuff, then they're kind of stuck in the first category, that it's just a training device. It's just an expensive heavy bag. And then of course, all bets are off. They can do whatever they want on that thing because it's just a training device.
Wow.
So yeah,
you would say that it's still relevant in Wing Chun schools for the most part,
yes,
or just in the culture. Okay.
Yeah, so I would say it's relevant to learning Wing Chun, but it doesn't replace sparring. I mean, there are people within our association who have learned the form, or not within our association, I should say within WT, the Larrington Line, who learn the form and learn the T-Sao sections, but they don't know how to apply it in sparring. So they just know some form on a piece of wood, and they know some two-man choreography, right? I also don't consider that really knowledge of the wooden dummy in practice. But then there are people that only learn the form, and they're like, I learned the form, and then they come to me like, so what's it for? And I'm like, your Sifu, the person who taught you the form, can't tell you what it's for. And then then that tends to then put great doubt in me in terms of, well, if someone comes to me and says their Sifu taught them the form but didn't teach them the applications because maybe they don't know them or know that it's special, then I also tend to doubt, well, is that the same way you look at your Buji? Did you just learn the Buji form and then a couple little ideas and then call it a day and say you finished Buji? Or did you actually learn how to use the various elbows in the different situations, how to use the Buji itself, how to use the Chansao, how to use the throat cutting hand? Why do we have this type of Kamnasa? Why do we do the big winding arms at the end? Because if you just learn the form and you don't learn the application, then we can't start at the wooden dummy. We need to go back at Fuji. And if your
All right.
Sifu,
I was
Sifu
just
only
thinking that
taught
we
you
need
a
to go
form,
back some.
yeah, and if your Sifu only taught you the form and didn't teach you application, then I have to ask, well, how was your Chum-Kyu taught to you? Did you also just learn the form,
Right.
or did you learn step by step? So then usually I learned the form, but I don't have any idea what it's for. That's usually indicative of a larger problem that we need to go back and start from the beginning. So that's what I got to say about that.
All right. Let's move right along to my man Jihad Battle.
Awesome.
All right. Hello, Segung. Where
Hello.
can one get some dit da jiao in New York? Okay, I'm assuming he's talking about New York City. You had mentioned it a while ago, maybe on Dudes of Kung Fu.
Yeah, I definitely talked about it on Dudes of Kung Fu, and but I have mentioned it on this podcast from time to time. Ditazao, for people who don't know, it's a type of Chinese liniment. It's basically kind of a medicine in liquid form, but it's topical. You put it on your skin. You do not drink it or otherwise
do
ingest
not
it.
ingest this. Okay.
Do not ingest it. Right?
It's
it has
like
an alcohol.
It's like Vicks Vapor Rub in a way for that
for Wing Chun or I should say for Kung Fu maladies, right?
Yeah.
It basically, there's a couple different schools of thought when it comes to Ditazao. There's a school of thought, or I should say a type of formula that's more for like if you get bruised and beaten up in Kung Fu training. You do violence, violent gorsao, you have arm full of bruises and your knuckles are all bruised up from hitting the wall bag or whatever. Then there are certain types of ditazao you can put on your arm or put over bruises and stuff to get the swelling and to get the inflammation to go down. Because if you look at the properties of the various herbs that are in different formulas of ditazao, most of them are simply anti-inflammatory properties. So basically, it's like a type of Chinese anti-inflammation water that you put on your skin. Then there's another type of ditazao which is more for conditioning. For example, for people who want to do a lot of wall bag training or might want to do iron palm training to toughen up their hands or toughen up whatever, then there are different formulas that are meant for that type of training. So you would put that ditazao before you did your wall bag training or your sandbag training, for example. So there's kind of like a skin conditioning type of ditazao. Now, of course, they're going to tell you all sorts of things like that this ditazao formula is going to seep into your tendons and ligaments and make them stronger and stuff. And I don't really see any scientific literature coming out saying that this ancient Chinese liniment that you put on is going to strengthen your tendons and ligaments. I would find that very hard to believe. I would think that if that was in fact true, some Western company would have been mass producing ditazao for strengthening the tendons and ligaments of all sorts of Westerners, and this would be something that would be well known. So I don't believe that, but I have used some types of ditazao that I found were very effective against bruising. You get a bruise, you use this type of ditazao, the bruising goes down, let's say 30% or maybe even more quickly than it otherwise would. But it's not like a golden bullet, right? And so I don't know how accurate the claims are in terms of that, how well it works. Sifu Cheng Chun Fan, who's one of my Si Ba Gong in Hong Kong, he is also a Dita doctor, and he makes his own brand. Supposedly Liang Zhan, our great grandmaster, had a formula of ditazao, and supposedly this is based off of that formula. But Sifu Cheng has also put in his own ingredients, including like camphor, which actually makes it smell a little bit like Vicks Vapor Rub. It's funny that you brought that up. When you smell
camphor,
when you smell Sifu Cheng's ditazao, it has kind of almost like a nasal clearing.
Just burns your
type.
nose hairs. Yeah.
Well, no, it doesn't. It's more just the one that clears your nose. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it has a very strong and pleasant smell. And I like his. I think his is the best. When I was going to Hong Kong a little bit more regularly a number of years ago, I used to stop by his office in Kowloon City to pick up, like, bring 10 bottles of them home or whatever. But the problem is I can't bring home enough to really sell it and make any money. I also don't have an import license for that. So I would have to go to, through customs, and they would open up my bag and be like, "What's this?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's just some bruising sauce from China."
Yeah.
And,
Explaining it,
they
right.
would always look at me funny, like, "Oh, are you trying to sell this?" It's like, I got 10. What was my big financial retirement plan was to go to Hong Kong and buy 10 bottles of this so I can sell that. I mean, so they would just let me through, but I haven't gotten that stuff in a while. Right now, if you wanted to buy some good Ditazao, you could go down probably to BLP, the martial arts store down on Mott Street down in Chinatown.
Yeah.
And
okay.
I think that they have a few. I think they might have the one made by Sifu Takwa Eng, which, if it's anything like the Sifu himself, who's a very, very good and very upright person, I assume his Ditazao is also quite good. And they probably have some other brands there as well. I don't know how much the manufactured Ditazao, how much better, I mean, compared to like someone who makes their own, the store-bought stuff, I'm sure that people think the store-bought stuff or the mass-produced stuff is not quite as good. It is also possible now with the internet, you can go online and get a recipe for good Ditazao and how to make it. So for most of making Ditazao, you need a alcohol base, like very strong alcohol. I think people often use some type of wine or even like a vodka or some kind of heavy spirit.
Wow.
And then you basically just put all the herbs in there, and it becomes this kind of muddy brown water. And if it's really traditional, you're supposed to take that stuff and bury it in the ground for 90 days before you use it. So
Okay.
it's also, I mean, you could go to Chiu, you could go online, find a reputable site, and I'm sure that they have the recipes there. You can print the list off there, go to an herbalist in Chinatown and tell them, here's the list you want. If it's in Chinese, you hand it to them, they give it to you, and you can actually make your own and go from there.
Kind of makes me
making
think
your own
of,
is cheapest.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of something we would drink back in the day called mamaguana.
Oh, yes.
With rum. It made out of rum or something like that. So, but question for Mikey. Mikey, I've seen Ditazao around the school many times, but I've never used Ditazao in any, I've had bruises. I've never had, anyone say, Dre, you should put some Ditazao on that. Have you ever used it?
I'd love to use it. But
you've never used it.
No, I mean, I've used Tiger Balm. That's about as close as I ever got to that. You know what I'm saying?
Tiger Balm.
But you see, the thing about it is if we're talking about Vicks Vapor Rub, then, my 20s were wild. Let's put it that way. Just leave it at that. It's just, it was, the funny thing about that kind of stuff is that it's supposed to be very, very good if you've taken ecstasy for bringing everything up, right? So now...
Yeah.
If I get some Ditazao, maybe I'll start taking ecstasy again. I'll let you know how that goes for you.
Okay,
and hopefully it'll cure my bruising as well, which would be super awesome. You know what I mean? Anyway, we actually have a question from the comments. Our man Lee Holmes from the UK has been waiting very patiently. So let's do that. He says, can you talk a little bit about the Wing Chun sections? I know you mentioned before that you don't teach sections, but I was curious about how you teach and break it down for your students.
That's a very good question. Now, this is a very WWT specific question. So for those who come from other lineages, this is maybe not the most relevant thing because this has to do with how Leungtang Wing Chun is disseminated and taught. And also it has something to do with politics and history and this kind of stuff. So a long time ago, let's say before 1977, Sifu Leungtang taught Wing Chun in a relatively systematic way especially for Chinese standards. One of the things he realized in the late 60s when he started to have a lot of success is that you have to teach according to some kind of program. Otherwise, if you have lots of students in your school, the one guy learned this thing from Lapta, the other guy didn't learn that, but he's actually been there longer. This other person learned both versions, both things, but also learned something else that guy didn't learn. And the problem was when you teach in the typical traditional Chinese kind of stream of consciousness, kind of Sifu teaches whatever he's in the mood to teach that day, you're bound to have students who miss certain aspects, student who got this, didn't get that, or they trained with this Siheng that really like these collection of techniques, but didn't really know much about the other stuff. And so when you have to codify this very large vocabulary of Chisao techniques, ideas, movements, whatever you want to call them, you then have to figure out, okay, what should the students learn first? And then what can they learn later? And what's the best way to teach them? Now, Larrington was in a unique position compared to his other contemporaries in that he had massive success in the late 70s. So whereas even the most successful guys in Hong Kong who were teaching Wing Chun, maybe they had 50 to 100 students in their school, but Sifu Larrington would come to Germany and have a few hundred in a seminar. And so that presented a new problem. When you teach the Chisao, how do you teach Chisao when you have a seminar with 100 people, right? Do you go and stick hands with every single person? Because if you start with the first guy, by the time you get to the last guy, the seminar is over, right? and so that can
what a great problem to have.
It is a great problem to have. And he came up with a pretty good solution. It's easy for us now, all these years later, to go, to find fault with his solution, because we are standing on the shoulders of giants. We grew up with this stuff, and it's easy after the fact to go, well, let me tell you the 10 issues that the Chisao sections brought up. But the Chisao sections did solve a problem. So what Sifu Larrington did is he did something that's kind of almost heretical in Wing Chun, is that he created sequences for the Chisao. Okay, now this is obviously going to bring it's a red alarms are going to go off, red lights and alarms are going to go off when you hear sequences and Chisao, because as we know, Chisao is meant to be a spontaneous type of exercise that's based on dealing with what your opponent does in that moment, what you feel, the direction of their force. And so it's a very organic and live thing. So how can you then create sequences for something that's actually supposed to be based on feeling? Well, I'll show you, or I'll tell you. When you have specific types of attacks, comes out Daichang, for example, the first attack, which is prominent in Chisao Program 1, Lapta, low attacks, Pakta, Tsatsao, all these kind of things, okay? How do you disseminate all of those skills in a way where everyone learns it the same way? Well, you create a basic teaching sequence. You say, okay, from Punsao, for example, I'm going to come in and attack you with this first attack. And then you learn how to do that. And then you go, okay, this is how you defend the first attack. And then you do this. And then you go, okay, well, when I do the first attack and someone defends and then does the pakta to me, this is how I defend that. And then we can go into this thing. Right. And then so what it does is it's like a bunch of if-then statements. And the whole point of it is to codify a rather large vocabulary of movement. Other Wing Chun styles may not have that much Chisao to codify. A lot of Wing Chun styles, they just do Punsao. They have a couple basic attacks out of Punsao, and then they have Lapta, and then they have Pakta, and then everything else is figure it out on your own. Well, okay, the Larrington method is a little bit more structured and nuanced than that. So we have, in other words, more Chisao to teach. We don't just do Punsao, just do Lapta, try to hit the guy, and then do Pakta, try to hit the guy, and pray for the best, you know? So Sifu Larrington created basically a teaching sequence. You first attack, defend, do this, go into Lapta, go into Jutsao, go into your indoor attacks, Pakta, low attack, all this kind of stuff, right? Shoulder launch, Latsao coming back in, all these kind of things. And that became Chisao Program 1. And the idea was as follows. And it was Sifu Larrington's brilliant idea, and in theory it worked, but it didn't necessarily work in practice. So he would come to a seminar, let's say, for example, in Germany, there'd be a few hundred people there. He would be able to break them off into groups. And then what he would do is he would show them their Chi program for their current level. Okay, you got to learn this and you got to do this. He'd let them train it. Then he would show them the next thing and then the next thing. And at the end of, let's say, the seminar, they would have a skeleton of movements. All right, the first attack, lap dot, all of these different kind of things that they could practice with a partner. And because it was done in a sequence, they could remember it. Because if I ask you to memorize 10 words, and I just give you 10 random words, it might be difficult for you to keep that list in your head. But if I took those 10 words and I put them into a sentence, then it would be much easier for you to remember the sentence than it would be for you to remember 10 random words. Even if the sentence itself was somewhat nonsensical, but you can remember a nonsensical sentence easier than you can just remember 10 random words. So that was kind of the idea behind the sections, that you would kind of learn, to keep my analogy, a random sentence so that you could learn these, let's just say 10 words, 10 techniques, whatever, right? And then next time Sifu Larrington came, he would show you how to use those movements in sparring. So the idea would be you would take the skeleton of a sequence and you would drill it for, let's say, 6 months. And you would get really good at doing the sequence, which didn't mean you had good chi sao. It just meant you could do a sequence. And at the end of the 6 months, you would be really polished on this sequence. And now it would be time to learn how to use it. And then he would come, and then the idea would be that he would then teach you guo sao, or chi sao sparring, and show you, okay, well, here's how you do the lapda in the drill. Here's how we actually do it in sparring. And here's how we apply all of these different things when your partner is resisting you. And then, so you would learn all of your chi sao techniques in kind of 2 phases. You would learn a sequence, a dry skeleton of a partner form, let's say, for lack of a better phrase. And then at some point in the next few months, either from your instructor or from another seminar, you would learn how to apply those movements in sparring. And in sparring, we really mean the other guy's resisting, fighting back, and you have to learn how to use these things in different situations. Then, you would learn the second section, which would then teach you a new set of movements. You would polish that sequence, and then you would learn how to do that in sparring with a partner. And then you would learn the third one and the fourth one. And then there were 7 sections of Chi Sao for Siunum, Tao, and Chamkyu. And then eventually, when you were qualified to learn Buji, you would learn the Buji Chi Sao, of which there were 4 to 5 sections there, depending on how much he wanted to charge you or not charge you. And then when you learn the wooden dummy form, then you would have to learn 8 wooden dummy Chi Sao sections, which corresponded to the 8 sets on the wooden dummy. So that's how it was done, very one-to-one. But the section was only supposed to be the basic introduction. Now you learn these movements, and it's a little robotic and a little stiff. Okay, now let me show you how to use the first attack in these different situations, and Lat Sao and Pak Sao and all these kind of things, right? You have to learn Go Sao in order to know why you even have these things. And you cannot learn anything if you only learn the sections. And so the problem was, that was his idea. Sequence, so you learn by rote like a machine, and then we deconstruct it and we make it real. And then you learn the next one in the same pattern. That was the idea. The problem is that as things went along, it would seem that, and this is just my speculation, I could totally be wrong here, but this is my observations. I have a feeling that over time, Sifu Larrington got a little lazy at his seminars, and he realized that it was easier to teach the sequences and to teach the sections than to kind of metaphorically and literally roll up your sleeves and then teach these guys how to do the sparring. Because in order to learn how to apply these things in sparring, you need a Wing Chun coach. You need someone who's going to kind of like play with you a little bit, feed you different things, resist you a little bit, push. And then as you get better at these things, then they're going to start really resisting you and fighting back and seeing how well you can do it. And once you can do it with someone who's resisting you, then the trainer might even throw in non-Wing Chun stuff in there just to make sure that you don't think the world revolves around Wing Chun. And I think as Sifu Larrington got older, the idea of kind of rolling up his sleeves and teaching sparring became less attractive, because now he's going to have to do it with all these guys in a seminar, and he's getting older and he's getting more tired. So what did he start doing? He started focusing on teaching sections. So what happened? You have generations of Wing Chun people who want to argue about the variations of the first attack in Chi Sao Program 1. Do you do it with a single grab? Do you do it with 2 grabs? Do you do it with a shift? Do you do it with a turn? And they will bicker about all of these things in a way that the Chinese WT people almost don't even know what they're talking about. Because in Hong Kong, the sequences were very simple and they only represented step 1 of basically 3 steps to learn Chi Sao. It's kind of like learning the Siunum Tao form and thinking you know how to fight because you learned the Siunum Tao form. No, you need to learn how to apply the Siunum Tao form against different types of attacks and then ultimately in sparring. Well, Chi Sao is the same. You need to mix up those things you learn in Chi Sao and then you got to put it in sparring. So if someone only learned the section, I can very truthfully and openly say they don't know anything about the Chi Sao. And then the problem is the section can sometimes be interpreted a little bit differently or can be shown in different ways. So Sifu Learning might show it one way in Berlin, the next week in Dusseldorf, he shows it a slightly different way. And now those 2 instructors who learn 2 different ways go, no, you're supposed to do it this way. No, you're supposed to do it this way. And they're arguing about the section. They're arguing about the least important of the 3 methods that will eventually give you competency in Chi Sao. And so that's why Sifu Learning's solution to a problem of teaching en masse very quickly became a problem of people now overvaluing the sections and thinking that the sections or the variations are the key. I can't tell you how many times people contact me, hey, Sifu Alex, can you teach me the wooden dummy Chi Sao sections the way you learned it from Sifu Learning? I'm like, I could, but I wouldn't really be teaching you wooden dummy Chi Sao if I did that. I would be giving you 1/3 of the program. You know, because then we have to mix that up organically, and then we have to put it up in sparring. If I just teach you the section, I feel like I've kind of taken your money and ran away for no reason. I feel like I'm ripped. If you come and if I just taught someone only a section, like if they paid me for 5 lessons to teach them, let's say 5 sections of Chi Sao, I would feel terrible afterwards. I would feel like I took their money and taught them nothing. And so the sections created a problem in that the students started to, it's like some kind of religiosity. How do you interpret the texts, right? And now everyone's, how do you interpret this section? Wow. And then they're going, is the first attack done with 1 grab and a tansel, 1 grab and a fuksao, 2 grabs with a turn, without a turn? What they don't realize is when you learn how to do it in sparring, you're going to learn why it might be done this way, why it might be done direct, why you might grab with 1 arm, why you might grab with 2 arms. Sparring answers the questions of variation, and they're trying to get all the variations by learning the sections. I have Sivus come to me from Europe. They tell me, oh, I have 5 versions of wooden dummy Chi Sao 1, and I want to know how to apply all of those versions in sparring. And I go, first of all, you only need 1 version of the section. What you need is 1 version of the section, and then you need the key to how to use it in different situations. You don't need more sections. You don't need more variations. So the problem was a solution created new problems. So that's the first thing. Second thing is kind of more on a personal note, why I don't teach sections is because originally the sections were meant for seminars. They were meant for a time when a sifu or a master or whatever would visit an area for, let's say, a couple of weeks, and would have to dump all this information on their schools and students there. And then they would go back, let's say, to Hong Kong in the case of Sifu Learning, and then 6 months later come back and then do another info dump. So the idea was, it was also a quick way to teach a high number of movements quickly because it's that nonsensical 10-word sentence rather than teaching 10 random words. But the problem is everyone thought the nonsensical sentence had meaning. They didn't learn, no, it's the 10 words you have to learn how to use in different situations. You have to learn a word and then put it into your vocabulary and use that word in different sentences. But they keep thinking the secret is in this 10-word sentence, and the secret is in learning what the words mean, not in trying to figure out different ways to interpret the sentence. You understand?
Oh man.
You need to learn
Yeah.
what the words mean, not the sentence. Okay, because
You learn what the words mean. You can use the word in any context.
exactly, and you can use it to create new sentences and new ways of dialogue. But you have an entire generation of WT people that are trying to shoehorn this one sentence into every situation. I go, no, you need to break it into the words. All right, so that is kind of the problem that this section's created. Now, again, to come back to how I solved it is, I realized even until a few years ago, I was still teaching the sections, but I would teach the section and then gauss out, and then we did it in the kind of Chinese way. And then I realized, but they don't even really do it this way in Hong Kong. Why? Because if your sifu is in the room or your teacher is in the room and you can see them twice a week, presumably because you come to class, then why is the sifu using a teaching method that's meant for someone who only sees the students twice a year?
Oh.
The section was for Sifu Learn Ting to do an info dump twice a year at the various locations. And then the instructors would take that information and break it down into day-by-day lessons on how to use this stuff, not into teaching more sections to new students. And I will never forget, I was in my car with Sifu Learn Ting one day, and I asked them, I said, this was very early on when I was still trying to transition from how I understood it to what he was teaching. So this is like 2003, 2004. And I remember I asked him in the car, I go, Xigong, how good should a student's section be before I show them how to do the application? Because in Europe, we had to have perfectly polished sections that were like so clean before we even allowed to learn application, right? And I noticed in Hong Kong, they didn't wait until the sections were polished before they started showing them to use it. So I wanted to know from the guy who created the program, how good does the section need to be before I can start teaching Gausso? And I'll never forget his answer, because my jaw was on the floor and it took me a very long time to reconcile what he said. And that was, he looked at me like almost like I had asked him a bizarre question. And he goes, the students aren't supposed to learn the sections. Only the instructor is supposed to learn the sections.
Wow.
And I was like, because when I was a student, we would all learn the sections. And he said, yes, when I come to teach the instructor class, the instructor seminar, the sequence is so that the instructor can remember all of those things. And then you teach the instructor the sparring, but the instructor is supposed to teach how to use it and sparring in pieces. He's not supposed to teach a section. The section is like an onomatopoeia in his head to quickly recall the information, or like a Rolodex. Tuesday I taught this thing, so today I can teach this thing. They know the sequence because they have the nonsensical 10-word sentence in their head, but they're supposed to teach the words, not the sentence. And that was completely lost in translation. And so what I did is I just broke everything down into words and phrases and drills, and I don't need to teach sections because my students can see me every week at City Wing Chun. I'm not going to leave in 6 months and then I gotta give them a bunch of stuff for them to chew on in the meantime. That's not how it works. So I hope that answers that question.
Cool. I think it does.
We have another question from the chat, actually.
Okay,
let's do it.
Yeah, Frank O. Hey, Frank O.
Hey, shout out to Frank O.
Yeah, hey, KFG, Dre and Mikey. Hey. Question. Is there a martial arts movie that you felt portrayed Wing Chun techniques most realistically?
Ooh.
Well, realistically, in terms of how they use it in like real fighting, I would have to say the first fight scene with Brad Pitt's character in the movie Snatch, when he knocks that guy out with a sidestep. That's the most realistic looking Wing Chun I've ever seen on film. And it's one punch.
Wow. Ain't that something?
Ain't that you were gonna say something, Dre.
I was gonna say recently I showed the little one the Alita, the Battle Angel.
Oh yeah, there's some Wing Chun in there, I think, right?
Oh, she kills it with Wing Chun. And a lot of it is like, what? That is total Wing Chun badassery.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Love
yeah,
that
I mean, look, there are a lot of films that make Wing Chun look like very visually appealing. I think, especially some of the earlier Yip Man movies have done a really good job. And you'll see Wing Chun elements in different films, a couple beats here and there where people kind of use some Wing Chun. And obviously, my favorite kung fu film of all time is Prodigal Son, which is a Wing Chun film. It does take a lot of creative license with how Wing Chun is actually done in terms of, like, if you want to say in an orthodox kind of way. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily realistic because it's highly stylized kung fu movie, right? So, I think that one punch that Brad Pitt does where he steps to the side and puts his body weight behind with the turn, it's like that's the old style sidestep. It's almost like the old style Leung Ting swing defense. It's perfect. It's beautiful.
Another thing that rings for me is the way Thanos beats the Hulk's ass in Avengers.
In Infinity War.
Was it
at the beginning?
Beginning of Infinity War.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that fight, but I don't remember individual beats in there. I just remember, that's also what made those Marvel films so great. It's like, Hulk is so incredible, and then you see Hulk versus Thanos, and then that just sets the stage for how dangerous Thanos is. You know what I mean? And I think that's super important in films. If you're going to introduce a villain, you have to know that this villain means business. And I'm still waiting for them to make Kang mean business, because I'm not quite nearly as intimidated by Kang as I was by Thanos. And I think that's the thing you need to do. The villain needs to be terrifying, like everyone around them is terrified of them, right?
We have time for that, though. That he's coming in a couple more movies, and I think his being terrifying is so far less about him being intimidating in one person, just for the fact that there are infinite versions of him and they're all batshit crazy.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where that's at. Now, the question is, will any one of those be a Wing Chun master?
That's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. I would love a Marvel. Shang-Chi needs to do more Wing Chun, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was it ended up being pretty solid. Wow, that was
absolutely.
A conversation stopper. There's a couple more here. One more in the chat. If you want to go for that one, or Dre, do you have another one?
Yeah, let's go for the next one in the chat, just because I want to make sure all our Patreons who did come live get their questions answered, because I can always answer the pre-written question on another episode. And the questions have all been good so far. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so the real John Rubio, as opposed to that fake one that always comes around. Sifu Alex, have you heard any stories of Sifu Lung Sui Hun? I can't pronounce this properly. Lung Sui Hun, of him training with Bruce Lee in Hong Kong during the 50s.
Leung Siu Hong. It's known as Duncan Leung. So I have not. I have done a fair amount of research into the various students of Grandmaster Yip Man, and especially anything revolving in the orbit of Bruce Lee and the types of people that he trained with and his training partners. And as I mentioned multiple times before, Sifu Chanchi Man, the late Sifu Chanchi Man, is a very good friend, knew Bruce Lee and had great stories. So I had the chance to ask him a lot about, because what you want to do is you want to find out who are all the people who are around at that time, because you want to paint a picture of like who was hanging out with whom. When they came to the Wing Chun class, like, who did Bruce Lee come to the class with? Who were his peeps?
Right.
Who were the guys that he was, who were his boys that he was hanging out with afterwards and stuff. And the Duncan Leung has not come up at all in Hong Kong. And so I don't know. I've tried to ask a number of Sifus who were around at that time about him, and no one, even many of the restaurant union guys who were around at that time, almost hardly any of them even knew Duncan Leung's name. Now, that doesn't mean that Duncan Leung didn't learn from Grandmaster Yip Man or anything like that, because you have to imagine Grandmaster Yip Man is teaching lots of different people at different times. He teaches some people privately. He teaches some people in the group class. He teaches some people over here. Even Sifu Chanchi Man told me that when he started learning from Grandmaster Yip Man at the restaurant union, because he worked in the evening, Chanchi Man was available during the day. and he paid to learn in the group class, but when he showed up, there was no one else there. So even though he was paying for the group class rate, he was basically getting private lessons with Grandmaster Yip Man, because all of the other students of Yip Man came in the evening when they were off of work. But because of Chun Sifu's job, he could come during the daytime. So while he was learning from Yip Man during the daytime, there was no one else there. So it wasn't until other people came or Chanchi Man went to other locations that people saw who Chanchi Man was. But had Sifu Chanchi Man only learned during that time and never went on to also learn at the Prince Temple or the other places, other people might not have seen him, and they might be like, Chanchi Man who, right? So it's totally possible that someone could have learned from Grandmaster Yip Man even relatively intimately, and other people did not hear about him. But I've tried my best to find out about Duncan Leung, because he is someone who's made a name here in the States. He's been around for quite a while. He has got a lot of students. There are no letters from Bruce Lee to Duncan Leung that anyone has produced. There are no references to Duncan Leung in any of Bruce's letters, even to other people like Wong Sun Leung or William Chang, and other people who are contemporaries of his time don't seem to have much to say about him. So I would have to assume that he must have learned privately from Grandmaster Yip Man when other people weren't around. Because
when did you first hear about Duncan Leung?
I heard about him very early on in my learning career, because he was in some of his students are online, and that's, I've read some articles from his students even before I started pursuing WT very heavily. And obviously Duncan Leung was in New York in the 70s. So there are some people who learned from him, and people who learned from people who learned from him still around in New York to this day. But I never met him personally, and I haven't found much reference to him in any of the historical stuff. But that doesn't mean anything. That just is what it is. The absence of evidence of certain people in historical records doesn't mean that they didn't exist. Didn't exist as like a student or something. Obviously,
like Beardy, of course, right?
You could definitely make a strong case that Beardy might not be real.
Or Dr. Ison.
Or Dr. Ison.
No, he's real.
Yes,
he's real.
By the way, before we get out of here, I did want to talk a little bit about that Brandon Lee video that I posted a little over a week ago. I posted it on my Instagram at the Kung Fu Genius, and also posted it here on YouTube, both as a short and as a regular video. It's an excerpt from an interview that Brandon Lee did. I'm going to say it's around the time of Rapid Fire, probably. And the entire interview is actually, you can find it on YouTube. But my good friend Hector Martinez, who's a Bruce Lee collector, he sent me this one clip where
he was being really cheeky in that video.
Absolutely.
Really cheeky.
And what's also funny, the reactions that some people had in the comments to it, because I didn't say what Bruce said. So basically, I'll just set it up real quick for those of you who haven't seen it. Brandon is asked by the interviewer if he could teach her something in Cantonese, and Brandon gets this kind of funny look on his face, and he's a little shy, and basically he says something in Cantonese, which is kind of the first thing any of your Cantonese friends tell you how to say, which is something very bad. And he says, and then of course he makes a joke that he said, she's like, what does that mean? He says, you have lovely eyes. It absolutely does not mean she has lovely eyes. he actually gave her a pretty brutal insult, but he did it in a kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of way. And also I think that, he had done a lot of those interviews, and I think, he was probably tired of getting asked the same questions again and again. And he also seemed to have a little bit of that streak in him where he, liked to kind of tease or taunt or start trouble or mischief or whatever. I just, because I watched that interview with Brandon Lee, of course, you know how YouTube is now. YouTube is suggesting all these different, Brandon Lee like videos. Oh yeah. And I watched a video last night. It was an interview with Brandon Lee for Rapid Fire, but he had just gotten the Crow, and he talked about how excited he was about getting the Crow, which is very bittersweet knowing what happens on the set. But the interview is about half an hour long, and I realized I don't think I've actually sat through half an hour of listening to Brandon Lee. By the way, whose sirens are those?
Most likely.
There we go.
There he is. Yeah.
Whatever. You don't want to live in Mikey Deane's neighborhood.
No, trust. I was just thinking the same thing. I'm glad I moved from Mikey Deane's neighborhood.
Yeah. So I realized I don't think I ever sat and listened to Brandon Lee speak for half an hour. I mean, I've seen his films, see this. And I've seen, he was on Jay Leno, which is a very short interview. But I was like, I want to hear him, and it's really lovely. He's very well spoken. He was very well spoken and very articulate. He had a very interesting take on things, and he actually talks about how he got kicked out of high school for being kind of a bit rebellious. And so this kind of streak, when you see him kind of say that curse word to the interviewer, it falls in line with what we kind of know about him. It's really a shame. It's a shame what happened to Brandon Lee, because when I saw that interview last night, we all know that it was a life cut too short, and in a very stupid way, and tragically and carelessly, but the memories fade a little bit. And then sitting there and watching in a half-hour interview with Brandon Lee, I was just like, wow. I was just thinking, if he had not passed away, I mean, I was just imagining him in The Matrix, and I was imagining him in other roles, and I was imagining him, maybe doing something with Sammo Hung in Hong Kong, and there was just all this potential, and he was so smart and so good looking, and it's such a shame. It's really such a shame, because there was just so much potential there. So I think before we get out of here, maybe we will answer one more question. I don't know if there's another question in the live stream, or if we're going to move to some of our pre-written questions.
Yeah, we don't have any more questions in the live stream. There was one comment going back to our previous question from Frank O. Guy Matt Jorgensen said that a good example would be Brian Mills from Taken. That's Liam Neeson's character in terms of Wing Chun on film.
Oh,
I think I saw the first Taken movie. I mean, when I see something that reminds me of Wing Chun, it hits me like a ton of bricks. Because I'll be like, oh wow, look at this. And if it doesn't, then it will be kind of unremarkable. I don't remember anything. I mean, look, when the hands move fast and you move close range, it's very easy to see parallels there. But I have a different when I see, if for me to see that there's Wing Chun in there, I need to see function. It's very easy to see shapes, Wing Chun shapes. But that doesn't mean that they're following the function. You could do Wing Chun shapes with a karate concept, and I wouldn't even notice it. I would just say it's not Wing Chun, because it needs to be functionally Wing Chun as opposed to just visually. And I don't know. I would have to rewatch that movie to see if I miss something. But if there's something functionally representing how Wing Chun works, even if it used a different way of moving, but I can still see the Wing Chun function in there. I would be like, oh wow, that guy's using some kind of Wing Chun idea there. But someone could do a bone cell in the middle of a fight choreography, and that wouldn't even register on my radar, because just to throw up a Wing Chun shape doesn't in fact mean that Wing Chun is being used. I have a very snobby high bar for that kind of stuff. So before
Shocker.
Before we get out of here, Dre, why don't you maybe give me one more question from our Patreons, and then we will call it a day today.
I got Mark Pinder.
Awesome.
And he says, AL, Mr. Genius and team, if you could witness firsthand anything related to Bruce Lee, what would it be? Any of his fights, training sessions with Yip Man, screen test for #1 son? Hi, by the way. Interaction.
She can't hear you because
allowed.
I have the headphones. I have the headphones. She can't hear you.
So no interaction with him is allowed. By the way.
So we cannot intervene. We can only watch. Well, then I think
he said, by the way, I think mine would be his fight with Wrong Jackass because of its significance, and also I'd see that coward run. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, who wouldn't want to see Wong Jack Man, not in the form that he later claimed that he was, some kind of real rival for Bruce Lee, but basically someone who's running and scratching from someone terrified of Bruce Lee's chain punches, terrified of actually engaging him. Yeah, I mean, it would be a toss-up between that and the watching on the set of Enter the Dragon when the one extra hopped down from the wall to challenge Bruce, and then Bruce kicked him in the face and made him draw blood very easily, and then in a non-vindictive way did not have him fired, allowed that stuntman to keep working there. I think that one, because the thing with Wong Jack Man is the only counter narrative to what happened that day comes from Wong Jack Man himself. And Wong Jack Man very regularly seemed to change his tune in terms of what happened. So you don't have a reliable narrator with Wong Jack Man in terms of what happened. At any given point, when you look at the different recollections of the late Wong Jack Man, it was everything from he had soundly defeated Bruce Lee to it was a draw to Bruce Lee cheated to inconclusive. It's kind of floated there. But for me, David Chin, who was a Chinese martial arts practitioner, he was Wong Jack Man's friend. And he was, when they showed up to the Oakland school to challenge Bruce Lee, Wong Jack Man came with some of his boys, because it's very rare. If you're going to go challenge someone, you normally don't go alone, right? And advice for any martial arts instructors out there who might have their own school: if someone is coming to start trouble, they almost never come alone. They always come in these little groups. And but of course, Bruce knew that there was a challenge. It wasn't like, I don't think they had showed up unannounced. But Wong Jack Man came with his crew, and in his crew was a martial arts sifu named David Chin. I don't know if he was training at the same school with Wong Jack Man or he was from another style, but he was part of the Chinese martial arts community. He was on Team Wong Jack Man, and he was also supposedly a bit of an instigator. He was kind of the guy who instigated the thing between Bruce and Wong Jack Man. And David Chin said Bruce Lee won, and he was the guy on Wong Jack Man's side. Now, when you're looking for evidence to support a claim, it's normally a very strong support of your claim when one of your witnesses is someone who attests to something, even though it's against their own interest. So David Chin is on the Wong Jack Man side. He would have every reason to kind of fudge it to Wong Jack Man's narrative, because he's Wong Jack Man's friend. He came with Wong Jack Man as part of the team that was challenging Bruce Lee, and he said Wong Jack Man lost. So because it's very easy to say, yeah, well, of course, Linda Lee is going to say Bruce Lee won. She's his wife. Of course, James Yim Lee is going to say this. Of course, the people on Bruce's side are going to be there. Yeah, and I agree with you. Although they all said basically the same story, you have to go, yeah, obviously there's going to be some bias there because those are Bruce Lee's students. But what about David Chin, Wong Jack Man's boy, who instigated the fight, was on the side of Wong Jack Man, was there the day of the fight, was like, yeah, Bruce Lee won. For me, that's it. So for that reason, I tend to believe the accounts of what happened that day, that basically Wong Jack Man ran away and kind of tripped and fell and Bruce landed on him, right? So it's for that reason that I think it would be a bit disappointing to go back and see the Wong Jack Man fight, because I think it's going to go the way you expect it to go, which is going to be a very inelegant, one dude's there to fight, the other guy's there running away. Just like in UFC, when one guy's running away, what does everyone do? They boo, right? So I don't think. So in other words, my belief in the account of what happened that day is not that weak that I still feel I need to go see it. What I want to see is what happened to that extra who jumped down and challenged Bruce Lee that one day on the set of Enter the Dragon. That one I want to see. That one I think is far more interesting. Or to see if there was an actual fight between Bruce and Lao Tai Chun, I think I would watch that. So
Okay.
it would go like this for me. I would say, okay, number one, I would say I would want to watch the fight between Bruce Lee and Lao Tai Chun. But if the genie that is granting me this wish says, but that fight never actually happened, or that was just that never actually turned into something, then I would say, okay, the Bruce Lee extra fight on Enter the Dragon. And then if for whatever reasons it was like, well, that was a big nothing burger too, then I would say, okay, fine. Actually, no. Now I'm thinking aloud in real time.
What?
No, I don't want to watch any of those. I just realized, why am I being so stupid? I want to watch Bruce Lee's fight in the Seattle YMCA versus the Karate Guy, where he supposedly ran over the Karate Guy in 22 seconds with chain punches and kicked him when he was on the ground. That's the fight I want to see, because that would also show you what was the early Bruce Lee like before any JKD stuff. So yeah, I've changed my mind in real time. It's the fight versus the Japanese Karate Guy in the handball court of the YMCA in Seattle.
I want to see him. I want to see him do the 1-inch punch on Grandmaster Baxter.
Oh shit! I'm curious. What's the screen test for number one son?
That's the screen test that you've seen before. You know, the black and white screen test that Bruce Lee does. You know, where he's sitting there. He's like, Bruce Lee, I'm 24 years old. You know, and then he's like, this is a crane form, and he shows all that and talks about the warrior and the scholar. That is often mistakenly labeled as his Green Hornet audition, but originally it was for Charlie Chan's number one son. He ended up not getting that role, but William Dozier, who was there, saw it, liked it, and then later used Bruce Lee for the Green Hornet. But originally that was for Charlie Chan's number one son, which is why I believe Bruce was showing a lot about Chinese opera and other things like that too. I think he wanted to ensure the producers that he wasn't just a Chinese guy, but he was really a Chinese guy who really knew this stuff. So, I would
like to see that fight that he had with the boxing guy, the
Gary Elms.
Yeah, Gary Elms.
No, I think if you could only see one thing, and you have the list of Bruce Lee's fights, okay. The fight against the Japanese guy was very serious. The Wong Jack Man fight, one guy's running. The Bruce Lee extra fight's kind of interesting. Lao Tai Chun fight is kind of interesting. I think the boxing match he had at age 17 or 18 would be boringly unspectacular. You know, Bruce wasn't able to put him away, maybe because he was still young and scrawny. Maybe he didn't quite have the power, but he outpointed this guy. So you're going to look at, you know, what intramural teenage boxing looks like. Now put that in the late 50s. Okay. I don't think that that's the Bruce Lee you want to watch. Just a couple years after that, you're going to want to watch that guy demolish a karate exponent. So anyway,
wow,
that's all I got to say today. I want to thank our few Patreon supporters who could make it for this time. A lot of our Patreon supporters are in Europe and in Asia, so I realized it was a little bit difficult to get everyone coordinated. So that's why we couldn't have that many. So for those of you who did come out, I definitely appreciate that. And the rest of the questions we answered were from Patreon. This will be the regular episode for next week. I'm going to ask our Patreons if there is, in fact, a better time where we could get the most number of people to come and join together, then maybe we'll do that. But I definitely had a lot of fun doing this. It was nice having Mikey Deane run the controls, so I don't have to see the constant streams and all the other stuff too. So that made things a lot easier. So thank you so much, Mikey, for controlling stuff and adding the extra sound effects of the siren. Definitely appreciate it. Dre, as always, thanks for being there to ask me the really hard questions and putting me to the fire to make sure that I give those real KFG answers. So thank you guys. That's everything today. We'll see you guys next time.
And every day I practice martial arts.